The console pulsed with a serene, azure light, a testament to the Xylos' meticulous engineering. Every circuit, every delicate conduit, hummed with a quiet efficiency, designed for perfect equilibrium. But equilibrium wasn't going to cut it. Not anymore. Not when the odds were stacked against them, 100 to 1, maybe more. Commander Thorne's calloused fingers danced across the alien interface, bypassing safety protocols with an almost casual flick of his wrist. Beside him, Lieutenant Anya Sharma gripped the edge of the workstation, her knuckles white. Sweat beaded on Thorne's brow, reflecting the angry, flashing warnings now screaming across the display. The Xylos, usually so composed, their multi-jointed limbs moving with an almost liquid grace, were now a twitching, chittering mass beyond the transparent observation screen. Their translators buzzed with frantic warnings, a torrent of data about structural integrity, thermal overload, and catastrophic failure. Thorne ignored it all. He grinned, a feral flash of teeth in the dim light. "They call this maximum output?" He muttered, the words thick with disdain. "Pathetic. This thing's just getting warmed up." Anya swallowed hard, the metallic tang of fear and adrenaline sharp on her tongue. "Sir, the energy readings are spiking. We're pushing past predicted tolerances. We could blow ourselves sky high." "Predicted tolerances for them," Thorne countered, his eyes locked on a single, glowing glyph that indicated the primary power regulator. He slammed his palm down, overriding a final, stubborn failsafe. The hum of the console deepened, a guttural growl that vibrated through the deck plates beneath their feet. The serene blue flickered, replaced by an angry, throbbing crimson. "Maximum output? Unlimited mode? Experimental turbo? Yeah, why not?" The air crackled. A sharp ozone tang filled Anya's nostrils, biting at the back of her throat. The very walls of the containment bay groaned, distorting slightly under the immense strain. Outside, the Xylos weren't just twitching anymore. They were scrambling, their chitinous forms scattering like startled insects. High-pitched squeals of terror pierced the low rumble of the overloading machinery. They understood. They saw humans doing something that violated every principle of their carefully constructed reality, something that defied physics itself, pushing a machine meant for precise, controlled energy output into a realm of pure, unrestrained power. The surge slammed into Anya, a tidal wave of raw energy that made her teeth ache and her vision swim. Her guts churned, a primal fear seizing her, but beneath it, a strange, exhilarating current began to flow. The desperation, the sheer necessity of this moment, had pushed them to the brink. This wasn't just about breaking a machine, it was about breaking the rules, about refusing to die quietly, about showing the universe what happens when humans tasted the bitter tang of survival and decided to spit it back out as a scream. The taste of victory, of defiance, was intoxicating. The vessel bucked and groaned, a tortured leviathan fighting its own demise. Every beam, every bulkhead, shrieked under the immense, unnatural strain. The deck beneath Thorne's boots vibrated so violently, it felt like his teeth might shatter. Inside the primary console, the crimson light, born of human desperation, pulsed with a manic, unstoppable rhythm, throwing flickering, hellish shadows across his face. He watched the readouts with a grim, almost joyous intensity. A mad scientist seeing his wildest, most dangerous experiment come to life. The Xylos had built this magnificent piece of tech with fail-safes for everything, redundant systems to prevent even the slightest overstress. Thorne had ripped them all out, layer by digital layer, like tearing pages from a rulebook he never intended to follow. "Status, Anya!" he yelled over the rising crescendo of protesting metal and overpressured plasma conduits. His voice was raw, but a wild exhilaration shone in his eyes. Lieutenant Sharma, fighting to stay upright, slammed her fist on a secondary diagnostic panel. Her fear was a cold, constant knot in her stomach, but it was slowly being eclipsed by a strange, defiant energy. Her skin tingled, not just from the static charge in the air, but from the sheer, raw power radiating from the core. The very air tasted like burned metal and ozone, thick enough to chew. "Structural integrity fields at 12% and failing fast, sir." We're bleeding atmosphere in sectors GAMMA7 through DELTA9. Thermal regulators are cycling uncontrollably. He didn't flinch. 12%? That's 12% more than we had a minute ago, Lieutenant. Keep it online. We didn't turn this thing into a ticking time bomb just to let it fizzle out now. Thorne's gaze shifted to the primary viewport, where the tiny, predatory ships of the Cathar Armada swarmed like angry wasps. They had pushed too far, cornered humanity one too many times. The constant gnawing at their borders, the endless skirmishes, the quiet, almost polite genocide, it had built to this. Beyond the view screen, the Xylos containment bay was pure pandemonium. Their sleek, multi-jointed forms, usually so dignified, now thrashed and stumbled. Their elaborate, highly sensitive instrumentation was exploding in showers of sparks and crystalline shards. A Xylos elder, its translator squawking frantic warnings about impossible physics and catastrophic dimensional tears, pointed a quivering limb at the humans, its multifaceted eyes wide with a horror that transcended their usual logical composure. They had designed a tool, not a weapon of mass reality distortion. They had built with Cataf limits trends. They think they know limits, Thorne muttered, his voice a low growl, ignoring the screams of the Xylos and the ship's own imminent demise. He flexed his hands, calloused and scarred, built for gripping tools and weapons, not delicate alien interfaces. They think, because they stop when the warning lights come on, we will too. They forget what happens when you corner something small, something that has nothing left to lose. He met Anya's gaze, a glint of steel in his own. We've been pushed, hounded, chewed on for too long. Now it's our turn to bite back. And we don't bite politely. Anya nodded slowly, the knot of fear loosening, replaced by a surge of defiant, primal energy. This was the human way. To be underestimated, to endure, to adapt, to fight dirty, to refuse to die politely. It was the constant gnawing, the endless struggle against overwhelming odds, that birthed something terrifying and unstoppable. And sometimes, you had to break every rule in the universe just to prove you were still alive. The air inside the control room shimmered, thick and heavy with the scent of ozone and superheated metal. It wasn't just hot. It was a living, breathing furnace. An inferno born of human will and alien technology pushed far, far beyond its intended parameters. Every console glowed with a furious, unsteady light, reflecting off Commander Thorne's sweat-slicked face. His uniform was already dark with perspiration, plastered to his skin, but his hands moved with unwavering precision across the sparking alien interface. The metal beneath his fingertips was blisteringly hot, searing his skin with each touch, a physical cost he barely registered. This was the fever. This was what it felt like when humanity decided the rules didn't apply. Thermal regulators are completely offline, sir. Lieutenant Sharma gasped, her voice hoarse, fighting to be heard over the ship's anguished cries. A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple, past her eye, stinging. The deck plates vibrated so violently, it was a constant, bone-jarring tremor, a deep-seated hum that resonated in her chest. Outside the primary view screen, the Cathar Armada, once a confident, aggressive swarm, was now a kaleidoscope of exploding debris. Their shields, designed to withstand precise, calculated energy blasts, were simply vaporizing under the raw, untamed power unleashed by the Xylos' own device. The Xylos hadn't built a weapon. Humanity had made it one. They didn't account for unlimited Anya, Thorne yelled back, a wild, almost manic energy radiating from him. His eyes, burning with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration, flickered to the Xylos observation chamber. The usually pristine, hyper-regulated environment was pure chaos. Xylos technicians, their multi-jointed forms designed for graceful, deliberate movements, were now thrashing, some collapsed in piles of sparking, twitching limbs. Others, the lucky ones, were scrambling for any exit, melting through emergency hatches, their high-pitched, desperate chitters echoing even through the thick, reinforced walls. They watched, horrified, as their carefully calibrated and utterly safe technology tore itself apart, fueled by the terrifying, uncontrolled human touch. One elder, its many eyes wide with incomprehension, managed to activate its translator, A series of frantic, desperate squawks. Impossible. The energy potential, it is beyond physical law. You will tear the fabric of local spacetime. You will consume yourselves. Thorn merely scoffed, a wry grimace. Yeah, physics. Who needs it when you've got nowhere left to go? He punched a final command, rerouting the last remaining energy dampeners. The control room flared with a blinding flash of light, followed by a deeper, more primal thrum. It wasn't just the ship that was groaning now. It felt like the very fabric of reality was stretching thin, protesting the sheer audacity of what they were doing. Anya felt a low-frequency hum resonate deep in her bones, a sensation that was both terrifying and utterly savagely empowering. This wasn't precision, this wasn't strategy. This was humanity's ultimate weapon, a fever-pitch refusal to surrender, an instinct to push, to burn, to consume, to break every single rule in the universe just to survive another second. Sometimes, the only way to fight overwhelming odds was to become something even the universe couldn't comprehend. Something truly, spectacularly reckless. Something human. The ship wasn't just groaning anymore. It was screaming. A high-pitched, metallic shriek that tore through the control room, grating on Commander Thorn's teeth, vibrating deep in his skull. The air, thick with the smell of scorched circuitry and ozone, shimmered with residual energy, making his vision waver. He clenched his jaw, ignoring the searing pain in his fingertips from the superheated console. This was it. The precipice. The point of no return where physics became a polite suggestion, not a law. This was the first cry of a dying, or perhaps a Kree-born vessel. "Energy levels are off the charts, Commander," Lieutenant Sharma yelled, her voice strained, barely audible over the ship's death rattle. Her hands flew across her own sparking panel, trying to keep any semblance of functionality. Her eyes darted to the primary viewport. The Cathar assault craft, those arrogant, swarming pests, were now not just exploding, but crushed by an unseen force, before their molecular bonds could even unravel. Pure, raw energy, untamed by Xylos safety measures, was tearing them apart, not with elegant precision, but with brutal, overwhelming force. The Cathar Admiral's flagship, a behemoth that had terrorized this sector for cycles, was visibly warping, its formidable shields flickering like a dying candle. Thorn didn't look away from the Cathar flagship. His knuckles were white against the alien controls, his face a mask of grim determination. They thought their fleet was impregnable. They thought we're just another species to subjugate. He muttered, his voice low, a primal growl building in his chest. They thought they knew the rules of engagement. They forgot one thing. He leaned into the microphone, his command echoing through the ship, and likely into the Xylos observation deck. They forgot that when you push humanity to the edge, we don't just fall. We launch ourselves into the impossible. He slammed his hand down, overriding the final, core regulators. A surge of power, so immense it felt like a physical blow, ripped through the ship. The deck bucked, throwing Anya against a bulkhead. Outside, the very fabric of space distorted around the ship, a maelstrom of crackling, impossible energy. The Xylos observation chamber, already a scene of horror, plunged into deeper chaos. Their translators shrieked, a cacophony of fear and disbelief. This is madness. Unfathomable. They have gambled everything. Thorn didn't hear them. He didn't care. His eyes, burning with a mix of exhaustion and triumph, watched as a single impossibly concentrated beam of pure, untamed energy erupted from the ship's primary projector. Not focused, but a wave. A brutal, unfettered expulsion of power. It slammed into the Cathar flagship, not punching a hole, but releasing it from existence in a silent, blinding flash. It was the last gamble. A desperate, terrifying, beautiful act of defiance. Sometimes, you just had to break reality itself to remind the universe who you were. The deafening roar of overloaded alien tech, the ship's tortured shriek, the Cathar Admiral's flagship unmaking itself, all of it vanished into an eerie, profound silence, Commander Thorne sagged against the console, his entire body trembling, not from fear, but from the raw, bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to swallow him whole. His ears rang, a high-pitched whine that echoed the phantom screams of the vessel. The air still pulsed with residual energy, a faint, acrid scent of ozone clinging to every breath, mingling with the metallic tang of his own sweat, and the metallic tang of fear that never quite left. The control room was a chaotic wreck of sparking conduits and cracked panels, a testament to the brutal, beautiful act they had just committed. A victory, perhaps, but one etched in scorched metal and shattered sanity. "Report, Anya," Thorne rasped, his voice raw, barely a whisper that scratched at his parched throat. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed with a chilling intensity on the primary viewport. Lieutenant Sharma was slumped, half-kneeling, beside her workstation, clutching a charred segment of alien wiring. Her uniform smoked faintly, tiny wisps of gray curling into the still air. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold it, the tremors radiating up her arms. Her gaze, wide with a mixture of terror and awe, followed his to the outside. The sky, once teeming with the arrogant, swarming Cathar armada, was now a vast, gaping maw of blackness, peppered with the tumbling debris of what had once been their ships. Not elegant, fiery explosions, but twisted, crumpled wreckage, silently, gravitationally tumbling into the void. The Cathar were gone. Their oppressive presence, a suffocating blanket that had shadowed this sector for cycles, was utterly, brutally annihilated. The victory felt less like a cheer and more like a heavy, silent scream trapped in her chest. Structural integrity, critical. Life support failing in multiple sectors, Commander. Anya reported, her voice thin and reedy, a fragile thread in the suddenly too quiet room. Her eyes watered, not just from the lingering smoke, but from the sheer, overwhelming rush of adrenaline draining away, leaving behind a cold emptiness. "We're barely a shell, sir, but they're gone. All of them." Thorne managed a grim, tired nod, the motion stiff, as if every muscle protested. The Xylos observation chamber was completely silent now, its transparent wall cracked in several places, spiderwebbing outwards. Through the haze, he could see them. The multi-jointed Xylos, once so fastidious and poised, now lay scattered or huddled together in desperate heaps, utterly motionless. Their advanced minds were clearly reeling from the blasphemy they had witnessed. They had seen something fundamentally impossible, something that defied their carefully ordered universe, a violation of every principle of safe, sustainable technology. They had seen humanity push past all limits, not with calculated genius or elegant solutions, but with sheer, desperate, reckless abandon. A slow, creeping chill began to replace the feverish heat in the control room, a cold dread that mirrored the vast, empty void outside. They had won. They had survived this one impossible encounter. But at what cost? The ship was dying around them, a broken, barely breathing husk, and the shadowed sky beyond felt heavier than ever before. Humanity had etched its defiance onto the canvas of the cosmos, a brutal, ugly masterpiece painted in the absence of an enemy fleet. But the true weight of that shadow, the full price of such an act, had yet to be fully paid. This wasn't a triumph. It was merely a moment of brutal, terrifying survival, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes about the sheer, unforgiving cost of being human. The profound silence that followed the Cathar flagship's annihilation wasn't a relief. It was a hammer blow, ringing in Commander Thorne's ears, vibrating in his very bones. The air, once thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal, now held a chill that seeped into his sweat-soaked uniform, a cold, empty vacuum where chaos had just reigned. The control room was a scene of utter devastation. Cracked displays sputtered weakly, wires hung exposed and sparking, and the deck plates still trembled with phantom echoes of the ship's death throes. Thorne pushed himself upright, his muscles screaming in protest, every joint a dull throb. He tasted rust and fear. Lieutenant Sharma, still slumped against the console, slowly pushed herself away, her movements stiff, almost mechanical. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, scanned the wreckage of their makeshift command center, then drifted to the primary viewport. The void was still there, vast and indifferent, now utterly empty of the Cathar threat. But the victory felt hollow, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. Then, a new presence. The Xylos observation chamber, miraculously still intact despite its spider-webbed cracks, began to stir. An elder, its multi-jointed form moving with a rigid, almost terrifying precision, approached the transparent wall. Its many eyes, usually placid and calculating, were now wide, pupils dilated, reflecting the flickering emergency lights of the human vessel. Its translator, crackling with static, hissed to life. Humans, the elder's voice was devoid of its usual melodic tones, flat and cold, like polished steel. You have violated the fundamental constants of localized space-time. You have pushed a containment field beyond the capacity of physical law. You have destroyed a vessel not with a weapon, but with sheer, unrestrained force. A force that, by all metrics, should not exist. The alien paused, its head appendages twitching minutely, a gesture of profound distress. The energy required, the localized distortions. It is a verdict written in iron, Commander, an unassailable fact. Thorn met the elder's gaze, his own eyes heavy-lidded but unyielding. He didn't offer an apology or an explanation. What was there to explain? They had survived. That was the only metric that mattered. "We had no choice," he croaked, his voice still hoarse, a raw rasp. The elder's translator whirred again. "No choice? You chose to disregard all safety, all reason. You chose to drown in the torrent of uncontrolled power, to gamble with the very fabric of reality." It gestured with a clawed limb towards the silent void where the Cathar flagship once hung. "You have won, yes, but the cost? It is like a great river, Commander. It will flow on, shaping everything in its path. A verdict of iron, washed clean by the endless water of your recklessness." Anya shivered, not from the cold in the room, but from the chill of the elder's words. A verdict of iron and water. Unyielding truth. Overwhelming consequence. Humanity had survived, not by playing by the rules, but by shattering them into a million pieces. And the galaxy, she realized with a cold certainty, would never look at them the same way again. They had shown the universe their terrifying capacity for self-destruction, for breaking limits that weren't meant to be broken. And that, in itself, was a new, horrifying kind of power. The cold wasn't just a temperature. It was a physical presence, a gnawing, insidious beast that seeped into Commander Thorn's bones, chilling him to the core. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the superheated inferno of moments ago, a cruel irony after they'd burned the Cathar fleet out of existence. The emergency lights in the control room flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to deepen the chill, making the air feel thinner, harsher. Thorn wrapped his arms around himself, his breath pluming visibly in front of him, each inhale a sharp sting in his lungs. The smell of scorched metal still lingered, but now it was overlaid with the metallic tang of utter emptiness, the vacuum of space slowly claiming their dying vessel. Lieutenant Sharma, huddled beside a shattered console, shivered violently. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably, a rhythmic clacking that underscored the groaning silence of the ship. Her fingers, stiff and numb, fumbled with a loose panel, trying to reroute power that clearly wasn't there. Her lips were already tinged blue. "Life support is at minimal function, Commander," she managed to say, the words catching in her throat, each syllable a visible puff of vapor. "We've got heat in maybe 20% of the ship. And it's dropping fast." Thorn pushed himself off the console, his movements stiff, every muscle protesting the cold. He ignored the aching in his joints, the burning in his extremities. This wasn't a fight against a fleet anymore. It was a battle against the universe itself, against the cold, indifferent void that wanted to reclaim them. 20% is still something, Anya. Can you reroute primary power to a single habitable zone, even if it's just the mess hall and a medbay? He barked the command, his voice raspy but imbued with a stubborn, desperate energy that defied the encroaching frost. "We don't need the whole damn ship. Just enough to keep us breathing." He glanced towards the Xylos observation chamber. The Elder, along with a few remaining technicians, still huddled inside, their multifaceted eyes fixed on the humans with a morbid, almost horrified fascination. Their personal environment suits, designed for comfort and optimal regulation, meant they were currently unaffected by the frigid temperatures that gripped the human command deck. They watched as Thorn and Sharma, shivering uncontrollably, bodies hunched against the elements, stubbornly refused to succumb. Their translators were silent now, perhaps out of respect, perhaps out of a profound, cold bewilderment. They had seen human recklessness, the explosive fury. Now they witnessed human endurance, a slow, grinding, deeply uncomfortable refusal to die. One of the younger Xylos, a research assistant whose elegant manipulators had once meticulously catalogued stellar phenomena, chittered softly, its internal comms likely broadcasting its bewilderment. Its head appendages slowly turned, as if trying to physically grasp the illogicality of human survival. They'd pushed a machine beyond its limits, now they were pushing their own fragile bodies past all reason. Thorn met the elder's gaze, a grim, weary challenge in his eyes. The cold was a tyrant, seeking to freeze the blood in their veins, to steal their breath. But humanity had faced tyrants before. They had faced overwhelming odds, blistering heat, crushing pressure, and now, the absolute, undeniable, soul-numbing cold of deep space. And they would fight it, not with grand gestures or explosive power, but with sheer, bloody-minded refusal to just lie down and freeze. Because that was the truth of it. When everything else was gone, a human would still find a way to stubbornly, defiantly continue existing. The cold had intensified, morphing from a biting chill into a crushing, oppressive weight that seemed to steal the very oxygen from Commander Thorn's lungs. His vision, already blurry from exhaustion and the flickering emergency lights, swam with dark spots. Every movement was a struggle against stiff, aching muscles. He could feel the blood retreating from his extremities, leaving his fingers and toes numb, painful. The dying ship groaned around them, a mournful lament of buckling metal and failing systems, each sound a stark reminder of their fragile existence in the deep, unforgiving void. This wasn't just a ship dying. It felt like the very heart of their defiance was struggling to beat. "Status, Anya? Anything?" Thorn rasped, his voice a hoarse whisper that seemed to dissipate into the frigid air. He rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the dull throb that had taken root behind his eyes. Lieutenant Sharma was curled almost into a fetal position beside her console, her entire body racked with tremors. Her breath plumed in frantic, shallow clouds, and her lips were a shocking shade of purple. She struggled to lift a hand, pointing a numb, shaking finger at a small, still glowing readout. "Ambient -80, sir, and falling. Main power, gone. Just emergency trickle. We're freezing to death." Her words were punctuated by uncontrolled shivers, her teeth chattering so hard they sounded like tiny drum beats against the ship's dying pulse. Thorn didn't need to look. He felt it, an insidious invasion, stealing his warmth, his strength, his hope. But hope, he knew, was a luxury. Survival was a necessity. He pushed himself towards the main viewport, planting his feet wide, bracing against the phantom shutters of the ship. Outside, the vast, inky blackness of space stretched before them, indifferent, endless. Pinpricks of distant stars glittered with an almost mocking brilliance, and far off, barely visible, a colossal, unblinking eye of a distant sun hung in the cosmic tapestry. It offered no warmth, no comfort, just a silent, ancient witness to their struggle. The Xylos elder, bundled in its environmental suit, stood perfectly still in their observation chamber, its multifaceted eyes now openly studying Thorn. Its translator remained silent, but the weight of its gaze was palpable, an unspoken verdict on the illogical stubbornness of human life. They had witnessed the humans detonate their technology, destroy an enemy, and now they were watching them try to outlast the universe itself. "That's the sun, Anya," Thorn said, his voice surprisingly steady as he pointed a gloved hand towards the distant star. Billions of degrees at its core, enough energy to power 1,000 galaxies. And it doesn't care one bit if we freeze out here. He turned back, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage of the control room, then settling on Sharma. A cold, hard defiance settled in his eyes, fighting back the numbness. It doesn't care if we live or die, but just we do, and that's the difference. He pushed himself forward, every step a monumental effort. "We're not going to just lie down and let the universe claim us. Not now, not after everything." His words were for Anya, for himself, for the silent, judging Xylos. The sun's unblinking eye watched them, yes, but it didn't understand the fire that still burned, dim but stubborn, in the fragile human heart. It didn't understand the sheer, bloody-minded refusal to surrender, even when logic screamed for capitulation. That was the human truth. The universe might be vast and uncaring, but they, humanity, would always find a way to stubbornly, defiantly, scream back into the void. The cold had woven itself into the very fabric of the vanguard, a shroud of ice and despair. Commander Thorne leaned heavily against the console, the metal biting into his clammy skin. His breath, each shallow gasp a visible cloud hitched in his throat. His entire body screamed in protest, every nerve ending a sharp, icy needle. The emergency lights, now barely more than dull embers, cast long, grotesque shadows that danced with the ghosts of their recent, impossible victory. The ship was dying around them, a slow, agonizing process. He could almost hear the molecules of the hull protesting, contracting against the brutal vacuum. Lieutenant Sharma, her face a mask of blue-tinged exhaustion, huddled deeper into her tattered uniform, her teeth chattering so violently that words were almost impossible. She had managed to reroute a minuscule amount of power to a single, auxiliary comms unit. A faint, static-laced hum, the only sound apart from their own ragged breathing and the ship's dying creaks. Her hands, stiff and unresponsive, hovered over the dim interface, trying to find anything, times any sign of the outside galaxy. They were adrift, a broken husk in an uncaring void, a monument to human defiance and suicidal ingenuity. Then, a flicker. Not of light, but of data. A single, faint blip on the dying comms screen, barely distinguishable from static. Sharma's breath caught. She leaned closer, her eyes straining, her body rigid with a sudden, electrifying jolt of adrenaline that briefly fought back the cold. "Commander, I'm getting something." Long range, unknown signature. Her voice was a cracked whisper, laced with a fragile, dangerous hope. Or perhaps something worse. Thorne straightened, pushing away from the console, his movements stiff and painful. Hope felt like a cruel trick. But curiosity, that primal human instinct, was a sharper spur. He shuffled towards her, his gaze intense. "Unknown! After what we just did? Who in their right mind would be heading this way?" He glanced towards the Xylos observation chamber. The Elder, its massive form still and composed, suddenly lifted its multifaceted head, its numerous eyes swiveling to the human comms display. Even through the shattered wall, Thorne could sense the ripple of alarm that ran through the few surviving Xylos technicians. They had been utterly catatonic since the Cathar flagship evaporated, watching humanity endure the self-inflicted cold with a detached, terrified awe. But now a new fear, more primal perhaps than even the thought of human physics breaking, gripped them. The Elder's translator crackled to life, its voice strained, stripped of its usual logical calm. An anomaly. Approaching rapidly. Its energy signature, it is unfamiliar, unrecorded. It turned its gaze to Thorne, its voice dropping to a low, chittering growl. "After your display, Commander. Do you believe this, stranger on the road, approaches with benign intent? Or is it drawn to the very impossibility you have unleashed?" Thorne stared at the flickering blip. A tiny, alien intrusion into their frozen, broken world. Benign intent? Humanity hadn't seen much of that lately. But a new variable. A new fight. A new chance. That was a different kind of warmth altogether. The galaxy had seen their destructive fire, now it would see if they could survive the fallout, and whatever fresh hell arrived next. Because even freezing, half-dead humanity refused to just cease existing politely. The unknown signature, that tiny, defiant blip on the dying comm screen, wasn't just approaching, it was surging. The Stamponsker, a crippled, freezing husk of a ship, registered its presence not with advanced sensors, but with the raw, guttural groan of its structural integrity fields collapsing further under the mere proximity of something so immense. Commander Thorne, leaning heavily on the cold, unresponsive console, watched the blip swell, his breath a ragged cloud in the frigid air. The cold had numbed his extremities, but a fresh jolt of adrenaline, sharp and metallic, coursed through his veins, fighting back the encroaching frostbite. It's massive, Commander," Lieutenant Sharma gasped, her teeth chattering so violently her words were almost incomprehensible. She wrestled with the auxiliary comms, her frost-nipped fingers clumsy. The small screen, struggling for power, flickered erratically, but the growing silhouette was undeniable. "And it's not slowing. Directly on top of us." Her voice was a tight knot of terror and disbelief. They had just faced down a Cathar armada and won, only to be immediately confronted by something far beyond their understanding, a presence so vast it seemed to swallow the distant stars. Outside the fractured viewport, the inky blackness began to resolve itself. Not into a ship, not into a fleet, but into something that defied easy categorization. It was a sprawling, incandescent city in miniature, a colossal construct of unknown purpose, shimmering with an internal light that dimmed the distant sun. Spire-like structures, impossibly tall, reached towards them, pulsating with a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the very core of their broken vessel, a silent, deafening roar. It was a thing of impossible beauty and terrifying scale, utterly alien, utterly overwhelming. The Xylos observation chamber exploded into pandemonium. The Elder, usually so composed, let out a piercing shriek through its translator, a sound of absolute primal fear. The Cygnian hegemony. It's the city ship of Xylos Prime. Its energy signature, it matched the disturbance. It was drawn to the impossible, to asterisk you. The Xylos technicians scattered, their multi-jointed forms scrambling over one another, pressing themselves against the far walls of their chamber, as far from the humans as possible. They understood this wasn't another enemy. This was the competermit Nurbal of their own civilization, drawn by the reverberations of human recklessness, a ripple in space-time so profound it had summoned the unsummonable. Thorn felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, quickly followed by a strange, almost manic exhilaration. He gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. The cold was still there, the ship was still dying, but now, a new problem, a new, massive, unknown factor had arrived. The city ship, with its silent, deafening roar of sheer, overwhelming presence, dwarfed them, a literal metropolis in space. He could feel its presence, a profound pressure in the void, radiating an ancient power that made the Cathar look like children playing with sparklers. "The Xylos' own capital ship," Thorn muttered, a wry, humorless grin stretching his frozen lips. "They're not running for cover from us, Anya. They're running for cover from their own people, seeing what we did to their tech." He turned to Sharma, his eyes, though bloodshot and exhausted, burning with a stubborn fire. "They think safe mode is a concept. We just taught the galaxy it's a suggestion. Now, let's see what happens when the owners show up." He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Humans don't understand safe mode. And apparently, the galaxy doesn't understand staying down." The ship's failing systems continued their mournful groan, a stark counterpoint to the silent, awe-inspiring majesty of the approaching city ship. The city ship of Xylos Prime didn't just arrive, it enveloped them. It was a continent made of light and impossibly intricate architecture, a silent cosmic leviathan that swallowed the distant stars, leaving the vanguard a splintered, dying mote in its shadow. Commander Thorn leaned against the frozen console, his entire body a continuous shiver, each breath a sharp, painful gasp in the frigid air. The emergency lights, now barely a stuttering pulse, cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to crawl across the faces of the humans, reflecting the sheer, awestruck terror in Lieutenant Sharma's eyes. This wasn't a vessel, it was a verdict, delivered by an ancient, unknowable power. "It's mass. It's causing localized gravity fluctuations, sir," Sharma stammered, her voice thin and reedy, battling against the chattering of her teeth and the deep, resonating hum that now vibrated through the ship. Her hands, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the auxiliary comms, but the screen was overwhelmed, displaying only pure, unreadable energy signatures. "We're being pulled directly into its docking bay, Commander, like an insect caught in a web." Thorn gritted his teeth, the muscles in his jaw aching with the cold and suppressed fear. He could feel the almost imperceptible tug, a gradual, relentless drift that made the term "adrift" ironically moot. They were no longer lost. They were found, and perhaps that was worse. He gazed out the primary viewport, his eyes burning with exhaustion and a desperate, defiant curiosity. The city ship filled their entire field of vision, its surface a dizzying tapestry of glowing pathways, towering spires, and vast shimmering fields of pure energy. It pulsed with a profound, rhythmic beat, a deep, resonant thrum that wasn't sound, but a sensation, vibrating through the very hull of the Vanguard, then through his own chest, like the slow, deliberate tolling of an impossibly vast, alien bell tower. Each pulse was a measure of immense power, of unhurried judgment. Behind him, in the Xylos observation chamber, the chaos had reached a fever pitch. The Elder, its usually dignified composure shattered, thrashed against the transparent barrier, its multi-jointed limbs flailing. Its translators shrieked, a high-pitched, desperate plea that crackled with pure terror. They know. The hegemony knows. The resonance of your act it drew them. They have witnessed the impossible. Its multifaceted eyes, normally filled with calm intelligence, now darted wildly between the humans and the immense city ship, reflecting a profound, species-wide panic. They will demand answers. They will demand responsibility. Thorn didn't look away from the majestic, terrifying spectacle of the city ship. The rhythmic pulse, the bell tower's toll, seemed to echo in his very soul. A slow, inexorable drumbeat, counting down to an unknown fate. Responsibility? After what they'd been through, after what they'd done, that word felt like a cruel joke. He turned to Sharma, his eyes heavy but burning with that stubborn human spark. Yeah, Anya. They'll demand answers. And we'll give them. Because we're still here. He straightened, fighting through the debilitating cold, a grim, determined set to his jaw. We didn't break their toys just to roll over and play dead when their parents show up. The cold was trying to numb them. The sheer scale of the city ship was trying to crush them. And the Xylos, terror was contagious. But that rhythmic toll, that silent judgment, it only hardened his resolve. Humanity had just reminded the galaxy what it meant to fight for survival, even if it meant tearing apart the very fabric of reality to do it. And now, they would face the consequences, head held high, because a human, even freezing, even broken, never truly stops fighting. The city ship of Xylos Prime didn't merely pull them in, it consumed them. The Vanguard, a shattered, freezing husk, was being swallowed whole, drawn into a yawning, cavernous bay that felt less like a dock and more like the maw of a colossal, living entity. The cold was a constant, excruciating ache in Commander Thorn's bones, blurring the edges of his vision. Every shallow breath rasped in his throat, a struggle against the air itself. The emergency lights were nearly dead, plunging the control room into a semi-darkness broken only by the shimmering, impossible light bleeding in from the colossal alien structure outside. This wasn't just an end to their journey. It was an intimacy with oblivion. Impact. Imminent, sir. Lieutenant Sharma gasped, her voice barely a whisper, her body curled tightly against the frozen console, trembling uncontrollably. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, stared out at the rapidly approaching interior of the docking bay, a dizzying array of glowing pathways, energy conduits, and immense, silent machinery. The sheer scale was mind-numbing, a city-sized cavern designed with an elegance that defied human comprehension, yet filled with a terrifying, silent power. Structural integrity, gone. We're going to be ripped apart. Thorn didn't respond with words, only a grim nod, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He could feel the Vanguard groaning, protesting its final moments, its metal hull shrieking as the colossal gravitational field of the city ship began to tear at its already weakened frame. He closed his eyes for a moment, the cold biting at his eyelids, then forced them open. They had pushed the machine beyond physics, and now physics, in the form of this silent, ancient power, was pushing back. Behind them, in the Xylos observation chamber, panic had erupted into full-blown pandemonium. The Elder, its multifaceted eyes wide with an emotion akin to pure, unadulterated terror, shrieked through its translator. The hegemony is aware. The impossible resonance, it has been registered. You have exposed their technology to Asterix chaos. They will see what you have done. Its multi-jointed limbs thrashed, and a high-pitched wail escaped its translator, a sound of absolute, species-wide horror. The other Xylos technicians were pressing themselves against the far walls, their forms twitching, trying to make themselves invisible, their fear a palpable wave radiating through the shattered, transparent barrier. They were terrified not of the humans' defeat, but of the implications of their impossible, reckless victory. Thorn ignored the Xylos' terror. His gaze was fixed on the rapidly nearing docking bay floor. He felt a strange calm settle over him, an eerie acceptance. The ship was dying. They were freezing, and an entire alien civilization's leadership was about to look them directly in their defiant, human eyes. "So be it," Thorn rasped, his voice raw but unwavering. He reached out a trembling hand, finding Sharma's shoulder, squeezing it gently. The touch was cold, but the intent was clear. "We stood our ground, we broke their rules, and we survived." What happens next? Well, that's just another Tuesday, isn't it? The Vanguard shuddered one final, agonizing time, a prolonged metallic scream that rattled through every deck. Then, with a deafening food that shook them to their very cores, the broken ship finally slammed into the automated docking clamps, deep within the heart of the city ship. A profound, heavy silence descended, broken only by the faint rhythmic hum of the alien metropolis and the ragged, freezing breaths of two defiant humans. The end was here, not with fire and glory, but with the stark, intimate judgment of a galaxy that suddenly understood one terrifying truth: humanity didn't understand safe mode, and that made them the most dangerous things in the universe.